GM Sprinkles here with another video. Welcome back. Today we're talking more Cypher System, more specifically though, GM Intrusions. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to GM intrude into my intro screen. So I want to make this video because a couple of weeks ago I saw a GM on Reddit. They were describing that they wanted their players to play the Cypher System and they had everyone on board except for one player who didn't like the idea of GM Intrusions. They liked everything else but GM Intrusions. They just thought it was a way for the GM to intrude on the story and take control away from the players and take away player agency. And that's not how a GM Intrusion is meant to work. But before I get into that, I want to just explain to you what a GM Intrusion is. So anyone who's new to the Cypher System, or you haven't played much, or you haven't read the book yet, or looking to get into the Cypher System, a GM Intrusion is described on page 404 of the Cypher System Revised Rulebook, and it states the following. The GM Intrusion is the main mechanic the GM uses to interject drama and additional excitement into the game. GM Intrusion is a way to facilitate what goes on in the world outside of the characters. An example is, can a Minotaur track the PC's movements through a maze? Will the fraying rope hold? Things like that. So a good example would be one of my players, they had a crossbow, they were threatening someone and they were holding it towards their face and they were waving it around and they moved away from their face and they accidentally slipped on the trigger of the crossbow and shot a bolt when they weren't expected to. So I GM intruded, the player accidentally shot this person, didn't kill them but did wound them and did make a complication, and it made things a little bit more difficult to then continue with those interrogations. GM intrusions are the main way that players get experience in the Cypher System, and the way that works is the GM interjects into a scenario, whether it's combat or a out of combat exploration, social encounter, will interject some kind of complication, excitement, or additional drama into the situation. So the player that is affected by this will get 2 experience, one for themselves and one for another player at the table, whoever they choose. A player can refuse a GM intrusion if they have 1 XP. So they spend 1 XP and they get no XP and that intrusion does not happen. The only exception to that rule is when a player rolls a 1. They cannot refuse the intrusion and they are not meant to get experience from that intrusion. I actually do still give the players experience because I think it's just a bit of fun and it makes a bit more excitement when you get a 1. And those intrusions don't necessarily need to be bad. It is described in the Cypher System that the GM intrusion is like the GM's way of rolling dice, because in the Cypher System the GM rolls no dice, and I completely agree with that. Now, I think GM intrusion should be more like GM complication or some other name, because I just think intrusion has a negative connotation there. And what I mean by that is the definition of intrude on Google is to put oneself deliberately into a place or situation where one is unwelcome or uninvited. And I honestly think that doesn't sound positive. It sounds like the DM's just taking control, and I feel like that goes against what the GM intrusion is meant to be. I think it's a bit of a funny name for the mechanic. I do understand that it's probably the most accurate, but I can see why players may be uncomfortable with the idea behind the GM intrusion. I think if you are a GM and you are pitching the Cypher System to your players and you tell them about the GM intrusion mechanic and they haven't read that, it can feel very player versus GM. It can feel very adversarial, and that's not what the mechanic's about. And if you do read the sections on GM intrusions in the Cypher System Revised Rulebook, it will say that it's not about that, and it's actually to enhance the story and help tell a better story. And at the end of the day, that's what we hear when we are playing tabletops, whether it's Cypher, D&D, Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu. We just want to tell a good story, and GM intrusion mechanics here to help that. And it's just the GM's way to bypass some of the more little nitty-gritty bits to get the story moving. I don't know where I read this. I have read a lot of blogs, and I've been reading through a lot of the Cypher System to really get my head around and explain this the best way possible for GM intrusions. And there's a quote, I'm going to read it out here. GM intrusions are unpredictable and strange twists of fate that affect a person's life every day and can be good, bad, or indifferent. At the end of the day, the GM intrusion should enhance the story, not control it, not constrict it. It's all about adding excitement and having fun at your table. It shouldn't push the players where you want them to go, and it shouldn't push you where the players want you to go. Now onto using GM intrusions. In the Cypher book, it does suggest using 4 per session or 1 per hour, and I think that's a really good rule of thumb. I think obviously that's not a hard set in stone rule, and you can probably maybe do 5 in one session or 3. But I think it's a really good rule of thumb, because too many GM intrusions, it just makes players, start predicting them, and it's not very exciting. And too few of them, the players start to kind of get worried, and they're not going to get that much experience. It's going to slow down the advancement. I mean, you might want to slow down the advancement, and that's a good way to do it. But at the end of the day, you want to keep that XP flowing, because the players are more likely to spend it and not hoard it. I did mention that you can do group intrusions, so it basically works exactly the same way, but instead of giving 2 experience to one player, you give 1 experience to everyone, and the whole intrusion affects everyone as a party. And that could be something like a player fiddling around with something and it might explode, or a cavern, they're in a cave and the cavern collapses on them all, so that might be a really good group intrusion there. I haven't really used many group intrusions, I more keep it personalized, but that's just me. But when a GM intrusion does happen, it's really up to you if the player gets a chance to react to that or not. A really good example of this, if a player was under fire and they try to take cover behind a car. So what you could say is that something in that shot hits the car, and maybe there's a spark and it ignites the gas tank and the GM intrusion just explodes. Now, there's 2 ways you can handle this. Either the player, boom, it explodes, they take the ambient damage from the explosion, or you can say that they have a chance to dodge out of the way as they hear the bullet and they can smell the smoke, and they have a chance to dodge out of the way and they can have that speed defense roar. And that's really up to you, whatever you feel is appropriate. And the Cypher System books is exactly the same thing, and I think it's a really good way to deal with it. Sometimes, if there's no way that they can avoid it, then for sure, just let it happen to them. If it's something they have a reaction, I think definitely give them a chance to react to it. And I think a good mix really works well. For that car example, personally, I would probably just say that it explodes, because you have to have ridiculous reaction time to be able to hear a spark or anything like that go off. But that's just my opinion, and obviously that's up to debate, but that's how I would rule that. Now, I did briefly mention rolling 1s in Cypher and how a GM intrusion will occur and the player can't refuse that. That doesn't have to be bad. There is obviously the mindset that it should be bad because they rolled a 1 and a 1 is bad, but I think we can get away from that mindset, because they can still succeed that task, or they can succeed with the complication. There's so many more options. And a really good example is if you have someone who is specialized in pickpocketing. They're going through a crowd, you've got your rogue, they're going through the crowd, and they see someone easy target to be pickpocket. They go to pickpocket, we get them to do their little sleight of hand or their pickpocket check, they roll a 1. So I'm going to GM intrude that they succeed that pickpocket and they manage to get that gold. However, that lawful player in the party, by a weird twist of fate, looks over and manages to see that. Nobody else did, except for them, by just chance. And that just adds so much drama and tension to the party. And then that's a beautiful roleplay moment there, where the player who saw the pickpocket, do they call the guards on them straight away? Or if it's, trying to stay hidden, they might go, okay, I'm going to have to bring this up with them later, we don't have time to go through that now, but I'm going to be having words with them when we get back to the tavern tonight. If you are new to GMing Cypher, it can be a little bit hard to remember to use the GM intrusion mechanic, which is very important obviously, because that's how the players get their experience. I had this issue as well, and I have been told many times that I should plan out my GM intrusions in advance before the session. I don't necessarily agree with this. I feel like if you can, and you can improvise your GM intrusions on the fly, you can come up with such better ideas and more personalized to the situation, and you're not trying to shoehorn something you've come up with earlier into the game that may not fit now because the players have gone in a different direction. However, if you're not that great at improv, I understand it can be a little bit tricky. And another really great way to use GM Intrusion is the Monty Cook GM Intrusion deck. It's fantastic. Even if you don't want to plan them out ahead, it's just really good to have a look at one and go, oh, yeah, right, that's got my brainwaves thinking, I've got an idea what I can do for this player here. I do strongly believe, though, that planning out all your GM Intrusions for the session is very dangerous, similarly to planning out all your combat session, all your combat encounters for that session is also dangerous. Because if you have something planned, even just subconsciously, you're going to try and shoehorn the players into going into that combat encounter. And same thing with the GM Intrusions. If you've got something in mind for one of the players, oh, this is going to be amazing, I've got this all planned out, and the scenario just doesn't fit for you to use, this one that you've come up earlier, you're going to try and just fit it in there, and it's not going to feel as natural and as immersive for the players as it could be if you come up with something on the fly that is much more relevant to the situation. Some GM Intrusions that I do like to plan out is the ones that are linked to the players' backstories. If you do have a player that has a demon or have a character that's chasing them in their backstory, a GM Intrusion, having that person turn up is a fantastic idea, especially if it's during a scenario where they're trying to be unnoticed and someone just calls out their name and challenges them to a fight. That is very irritating for the players and a lot of fun though as well. It's a really good GM Intrusion and something you should definitely plan out. And because it is such a broad thing, you may not use it in the next session, but it's just something good to have in your back pocket, and you've got that ready for that when that perfect time for them to turn up. But I really love this idea of linking GM Intrusions to a character's backstory or having them consequences for their previous action. I actually got this idea from Cone Mandela's blog. He has some great ideas how to use GM Intrusions. Please go and check that out. I'll put the link in the description below. Really good stuff. I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of some of his other great ideas, and I actually really love this one. Another great use of GM Intrusions is to delegate resource tracking. No need to worry about the players tracking ammo or their arrows. Wait until the critical shot, a crucial moment where it's life or death, and of course there's only one bullet left in the gun or one arrow left in the quiver. And that's just good storytelling, and we see that kind of trope in fantasy storytelling all the time, or in fantasy tales, or in fairy tales. And it's a beautiful storytelling moment, and it's such a great idea. And another idea, if you're not playing a survival game, so you're not really tracking how many rations people have, that's totally fine. But then they're out on the road in the middle of nowhere, you use a GM Intrusion, and then, oh man, I got no rations here. And that's a really fun GM Intrusion, so you don't need to track these little nitty gritty things. Because personally, I don't like to track ammunition or rations, but this way you can still have that crucial moment where like, oh, I'm out of rations, or oh my goodness, this is my last arrow, I better make this shot. And it just intensifies the story, and then the players know, well, when we go to town, I gotta get me some arrows, I've got to get me some rations so this doesn't happen again. And it's just a really fun GM Intrusion, and just ups the stakes a lot. But seriously, check out Cone's blog, it's really good. He's full of great ideas like the ones I just said. 100% recommend. He's got some great articles there on how to play a Cypher System, how to really squeeze its potential out of the system. And GM Intrusions can obviously seem daunting to players who don't fully understand them, or even they do understand them, and they can feel that their choices just don't matter, and it's just a way for the GM to control the story, which is not what it's about. And I know I've kind of already said this, but just to reiterate that point, it's not about that. And even if the players are really worried about this GM Intrusion mechanic, there is also a player intrusion mechanic where they get to spend 1 XP, and they also get to add flavor with their player intrusion. For an example, you might have a warrior and they're really good with a sword and a crossbow, and they're fighting and they're dueling and they lose the duel. But what you could do, obviously your GM has to approve it, is you could spend 1 XP and say that, yeah, you lost, but you have a crossbow aimed at their chest and they haven't realized yet as you were disarmed and you put a crossbow and they didn't realize. It's just a nice little bit of flavor that you can really make your character feel pretty badass in that scenario. Or, you know, if you're a character who's very nimble, you might be able to tell the GM, look, I'm going to spend 1 XP and just say, instead of having to make my acrobatics check, I do this stuff all the time. I'm an acrobatic in the circus, so I can jump over this tightrope. I can walk this tightrope quite easily. And you know, I think that's fine, like to have that player agency and let the player like just intrude there as well. I would avoid using the GM Intrusion to make a player fail a check that they would have passed, because it just makes them feel like their choices don't matter, and they'll start hoarding XP to always refuse those GM Intrusions. They're going to start falling behind their character, and then no one's going to be having a good time. Thank you so much for watching. If you did want to follow me elsewhere, you can follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, or Facebook. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share it to your friends. If you don't have any friends, just put an advertisement on a bulletin board saying, seeking friends. Have a lovely day, keep rolling those dice, but don't let them define you.